So real quick, before I cry over my Celtics, a new Sporting Logically podcast you can find in the top comment of this video. You can find it on iTunes and Spotify. We mainly talked about the Anthony Davis trade. And now we have to look at the situation my Celtics are in, where apparently Al Horford is going to leave now. The report for a little bit was he's just going to restructure his deal. But now it seems with Kyrie leaving and Horford being a little older, I guess it seems like the Celtics may have to deal with their two best players leaving. And if that's the case, then the great situation that this seemed to be of a couple years ago, or hell, a few months ago, a little more than a few months ago, but you know what I mean, is basically gone at that point. And then the team would be forced to have Tatum and Jalen be the two main dudes to lead this team for the next whatever years. And I mean, I like both of those players, and I think Tatum's potential is still very high, and I think Jalen can be one of the best defensive players in the league and stuff, but that's certainly a lot worse than what it looked like not too long ago. Now, Hayward, he could still be a player, no doubt. Do I think he can be a 20-plus point dude who can make a couple all-star teams, which is what he was with the Jazz? I mean, at this point, you have to think maybe he's going to be a little worse than that, which is still a pretty damn good player, but again, not exactly what you signed up for if you were this team not long ago. So then the other thing this does, I think, is it kind of forces this team to look for more young players that they can be excited about long-term, and they do have their draft picks between the Grizzlies pick, and they got decent amount of picks this season and all that, so you hope that you can hit on some of those, and I'm sure Danny Ainge is always going to look to trade those selections if the right move comes along, but I mean, you don't really have the Nets picks anymore, and by that I mean they don't exist anymore, so this team does not have a treasure chest of assets anymore. It's still pretty good, but you know. So then the other thing to look at is, okay, well, they're about to get a bunch of cap space if Kyrie and Horford leave, and if that's the case, well, could you sign a big-time player and hopefully keep this thing going? I mean, all of the star free agents haven't been rumored for the Celtics at all. Now, part of that is also because the Celtics, we thought, weren't going to have that much cap space, but I don't picture those reports just suddenly changing because the Celtics situation is different now. Like, I can't picture any of these guys being like, oh, you know what, now I want to go to Boston. It just seems unlikely. So then it becomes a matter of how are you going to get that young, relatively young star? I've heard reports of Bradley Beal. I mean, yeah, it's possible that Beal gets moved, but as far as how the Celtics would actually make that deal, I don't know, because you're not going to give the Wizards Tatum or Jalen, I have to assume. Although I will say, if I was confident that Beal was going to stay, I would put Jalen in the trade. What, are they going to want Gordon Hayward and a couple of extra picks? I mean, I wouldn't really want that if I was the Wizards. And plus, Beal's free agency is not too far from now, and maybe this offseason would instill a little bit of fear in Danny Ainge to be like, maybe I shouldn't trade for a guy on a shorter contract again. So then you say, all right, look at free agency, right? Now, I should say, I'm not saying a trade is impossible. I'm sure Danny Ainge is going to sniff around and all that stuff, but I just don't think it's super likely. So if we look at free agency, what young player is there who has potential to keep on getting better and you think you got a real shot at? I mean, I think the first one you notice is D'Angelo Russell, right? Because if Kyrie is going to go to the Nets, and then, as all the reports would suggest, they then would just not be as open to keeping D'Angelo Russell, and that certainly opens it up for the Celtics. He's a restricted free agent, and just looking around for guys they could actually get, he just seems to be the one. I mean, the only other thing I could think of, and there was a report that suggested they might do this, is that they would trade up to the 4th pick to get Darius Garland. And maybe that could be their new young player to feel excited about. So they could go that route. It would certainly be a cheaper option. But D'Lo seems to be the only one. I mean, the only other young dude I could think of who had a bit of a year was like Julius Randle. And, I don't know. I mean, that's an option. I think you could argue that he had more of a box score season than anything else, but, I mean, somebody's got to score, so in that regard, he was impressive. And, of course, there's a chance that Danny Ainge does not care about either one of these two players, and if that's the case, then whatever. But I'm just kind of spitballing at this point, because if it's none of these things, then the Celtics are going to go the really boring route, which is basically just kind of shoring up the rest of the roster with, I guess, veterans, and you just hope that Tatum and Jalen can be as good as possible, and Hayward can keep you kind of still going, and I just don't picture this front office being that safe, especially because if you start mapping out each season, between paying Tatum, paying Jalen, Hayward still being on the team, Marcus Smart still being on the team, it does become a little bit of, if you don't use your cap space relatively quickly, you could end up losing it from just re-signing guys. So they just might not have that many off seasons to really boost up the roster anyway. So I guess these are all things to care about. So yeah, definitely not looking great if Horford and Kyrie leave. And as a Celtics fan, I hope that this video proves to be irrelevant and at least Horford comes back. I'm pretty much ready for Kyrie to leave, but I did kind of think that Horford was going to stay and it was going to kind of make the team still pretty good. And, yeah, might not be the case. So there's the Celtics for you. Once again, new Sporting Logically podcast in the top comment of this vid. Talked about Anthony Davis trade, and I'm done.